Right, I'll just introduce ourselves. Those of us who are running the session. I'm Phil Siddle. I'm the Assistant General Secretary who oversees the regional and national centres in the NHBT, based at our headquarters in Rednall. And we've got Chris.
Yeah, Chris Weavers, Head of Campaigns Communications, responsible very much for what it says on the tin.
So what we're going to do is run through some information about annual conference due to take place, obviously, this coming weekend. Another session is being recorded just so people who couldn't make this can watch it afterwards. And it's to take you through the information you need to know about how conference works. So hopefully you'll be able to get the best out of conference when you get to Harrogate later this week. I assume by the nature of it being the kind of first time attendees meeting that most of you have not been before, but I appreciate some of you may have been and have decided to come along to find out a bit more, or perhaps you attended in a previous year as an observer rather than an elected representative. But for whatever reason you're here, you're all very welcome. We're going to run through a presentation. Try not to do death by PowerPoint, but we'll try and get through it in a reasonable pace. Between Chris and myself, and we'll pick up questions then towards the end. You are welcome to indicate later on if you want to ask a question using the hands in Zoom, if that suits you as such, or if you would rather put a question in the chat, that is also fine, and we'll try and pick them up as well. If you do want to put a question in the chat, I would just ask that you put question in front of it, because sometimes people put comments. Just can't contribute, which is fine, but we might miss them. So just type the word question before the question that you want to put, and we'll try and pick them up at the end as well. Is that all right with everyone? Cool. Okay, so we'll pick up the presentation then for conference. So annual conference this year is due to take place at the conference centre in Harrogate. I know people will be arriving later this week, and we're going to talk to you about what conference sets out to do and the ways you can contribute as an elected representative. If any of you are an observer, you won't be able to speak and vote at conference, so it is worth bearing that in mind, but we'll address that when we get to those points. So if you want to move on, Chris. So what is conference? Hopefully you know this by volunteering to stand for election to come to conference. It's the annual meeting of the union. It's taken place at Easter for as many years as I can remember, at least 16. And it's the supreme policy making body of the union. So your national executive committee members do meet on a monthly basis to discuss the running of the union and policy issues, but they are essentially carrying out the policy that's set by conference every year. So it's the main policy making, the highest decision making body in the union. What does conference do? It receives and considers reports, so we'll come back to this, but there's various reports that they will look at over the weekend. The key part of it is making motions and determining policy for the next year ahead. They decide on rules of the union. On this particular conference, there are no rule changes proposed. Last year, there was actually a whole day rules conference, which is a bit unusual as well. Sometimes there are tweaks to the union rules. This year, there are no rule changes on the agenda. But also, it disseminates information. So around conference, there'll be other information you can access, both physically and through the app, which will come to the conference app. So it's a way of getting information on certain campaigns and initiatives as well. I'll pick up the questions as we come through. So I saw one there. So what roles do people have? The elected representatives, which will be all of you in this virtual room, you're there to engage in the debate that takes place in the conference hall. You also vote on the motions as to whether you support them or disagree with them. And also part of your role is to report back to people in your area. So those of you who are active in your local association, you may want to report back with anybody else who's attended conference from your area on the decisions and what happened at annual conference. The national officers who you elect every year, so the president, senior vice president, junior vice president, ex-president, and the honorary treasurer, will, along with the national executive, will give you a report on the activity that took place in 2023. They will introduce certain motions that they propose to the national executive, and they will also, like you, engage in the debate and vote. Staff like myself and Chris, and anyone with I think, a green lanyard usually. Don't quote me on the colour, but it'll become very clear when you get there. We'll have staff badges on. We're there to organise conference, to make it run smoothly. By all means, approach staff members whenever you need to, both NHBT staff, but also staff who run the conference centre, about anything you need over the weekend. But we're also there to implement the policy decisions that you make. So we won't speak at conference. The only exception to that is the unique role of the General Secretary, who is elected as well as being a staff member, who obviously does will be addressing conference. But all of the staff members won't be speaking. We're there to carry out the decisions that you make. Chris? So what do you need? And I know there was a question about where to access documents. Everything that you need is in the conference app, all of the documents. So you should have been sent pre-joining instructions already about downloading the app. It doesn't take long to do. Took me a couple of minutes, and to register and log in takes moments, and we'll come back to the app briefly. But in there you can access all the documents. If you don't want to read them through a phone or tablet or mobile device, which you may not, we prefer not to, they're all on the NHBT website as well. So the conference agenda is a key document that includes all the motions that will be debated over the weekend. There's a guide to the conference and the exhibition that includes guide to the virtual exhibition and information you need to know about conference. So things such as, I think, Wi-Fi passwords and where certain facilities are around the conference centre. That kind of useful information is included in the conference guide. The financial statements, which are quite lengthy, I wouldn't necessarily recommend reading them in advance unless you've got a particularly bad case of insomnia. But no, more seriously, the financial statements are important in terms of the financial health of the union. But do peruse them before you get to conference. But they will be presented by the honorary treasurer as part of the conference. And I say that because unless you're particularly minded to, looking at financial statements is quite intense and understanding them. But you will get a presentation on those by the honorary treasurer, which will make that more meaningful to you at conference. The annual report is a report of all of the activity that the union undertook on behalf of members as directed to through the policies set by annual conference last year, and that will be debated on as well as part of the conference agenda. The minutes of conference last year are in there for the record of what motions were passed, and also you'll have access to the rules of the union and the standing orders. What are the rules and standing orders? Well, the rules do include some aspects about the running of conference, but most of the stuff you need to know is actually in the standing orders of conference. If it's your first conference, by all means do have a look, but what this presentation will take you through is the key information you need to know from the standing orders. You don't necessarily need to know exactly how every motion met the agenda or every point, every procedural motion, but you do need to know how long you can speak for if you decide to speak at conference. So we'll cover that key stuff now. So in your pre-conference information, you've had your joining instructions and you've had details of the conference app. Has anybody downloaded it as yet? Had a look? Yeah, I saw somebody did at least. So I had managed to have a look at it. It's quite smooth to do. It also includes a link to the website. I mean, I like a number of you will have. I'll have a laptop in there where I'll refer to the agenda on a laptop screen, or I'd use a iPad tablet just because it is easier to read an agenda and the documents. But you can get them all through the app if you prefer. It's completely up to you. So you should have all have had that. If you haven't, then give us a shout towards the end of the meeting or contact annual conference. I can see that Chris has put the email address for the annual conference team in the chat. If you're missing anything, you should have had your joining instructions. The app can be accessed by any tablet, or you can actually access the app as well through a web interface on a laptop or PC. If you have any issues, there's support advice on the website, but if you would rather talk to someone, which you completely can be more helpful if you're having any issue with installing it, there will be support at the conference centre. So there's actually an app support desk near the registration area when you get to Harrogate, and the staff there will help you install it onto whatever device you want, or help you get access if there's any problems. The only thing I'd say as a kind of tip is when you first register, you have to put your email address in, and it sends you a code to log in. The code does take a few minutes. It can take about 5 or 6 minutes to come through to your email, and then you can use that code to log into the app. So hopefully that just bear that in mind, and that'll be fine. Inside the conference app, there is a competition. I have took part. Well, staff can't take part, but I did play around with it last year. But it basically is different ways of engaging. So if you use different parts of the app, you score points. Is there a prize, Chris? Remind me.
Yes, there is a prize. I can't remember off the top of my head what it is, but certainly they are good enough that they've engendered a lot of competition, both at previous annual conferences and at our consultation conferences. We haven't quite come to blows yet, but yeah, good prizes will come to those who engage.
Excellent. I just look at it. Yeah, there is a game. It says join the game, and I haven't done it yet. It's starting soon. So yeah, do that when you're at a conference. I say just it's to make you more familiar with the app and get a chance to use all of it. Okay, next slide.
Yeah, just before we move on, I just also say on the app, there's obviously been questions about hard copies and accessibility. There will always be exceptions to this where, for various reasons, hard copies might be needed for by our disabled members for certain reasons. But broadly speaking, the feedback has been from members that actually accessibility is improved by having them available online via the app, because obviously it allows each member to set the visibility that they would like, that they find most accessible. So, for example, by amending font sizes or screen brightness and the like. But if there are any problems, do get in touch via that ANCONF email address, and we'll make sure that everybody can access the documentation however suitable for them.
Thank you for that, Chris. Sorry, it's hard to review questions as you speak, which is why I was going to do them all at the end. But I know Chris is picking some up, so I do appreciate that, Chris. So useful information. Before we go on to talking about how the actual mechanics of the conference works in the hall, other things you need to know before you get to Harrogate. So registration opens on Friday at 11:30 a.m. for disabled members. And then all of the attendees can register from 12 noon. I would just urge you to arrive, when I say early, please don't leave it until 5 to 2, unless you're arriving to Harrogate late. Last year, we did have a lot of people try and register in the 10 minutes before conference started, and it did lead to rather significant delays at registration. So there's plenty of time, and there's a fast track registration system as well. So it's very, very quick to register. But obviously, if we do get 600 people trying to register at 10 to 2, that will cause a bit of a bottleneck. So please do register at some point in the period between 12 and 2 p.m. when you arrive. Conference then will start promptly at 2 p.m. and we'll talk about the sessions and how they run. Other things just to be aware of at conference when you're there. There is a food bank. There's actually a physical food bank where you can donate food, but we are encouraging people to make virtual donations, so cash donations for food to the food bank, and that's run by the Trussell Trust, which we'll be doing running throughout the weekend. Also, over the weekend, Workers' Memorial Day badges will be sold from the registration area as well, recognising those people who have tragically lost their lives at work over the years. So those badges will be available. Thanks, Chris. In terms of the facilities on site, I'm assuming that people here hadn't been to conference before, but Harrogate is is a compact conference centre. It's right in the centre of Harrogate, which is good. Sometimes the conference centre views, such as in places like Belfast, are a good sort of 10 minutes walk away from other, well, not other facilities, but from the kind of heart of the city or the town. Harrogate is really, really central. In the conference centre, there are coffee bars on site to get coffee, like if you need to pop out the conference session to get a drink. The office facilities are there. Lunches and dinners are available outside the conference centre. So just directly outside the centre, you've got a whole range of places you can get food in the lunch period, and obviously after conference finishes in the evenings. The details of the expenses that are available to representatives are in the conference app. And you can also submit your expenses through the form in the conference app afterwards. It's important to keep receipts because receipted expenditure is what can be reimbursed by the union. So do keep receipts, itemised receipts of any food that you purchase when at conference. In terms of other events, depending what region you're in, there may be some kind of social or meetup event. There are various kind of social engagements that happen outside of the formal conference session, and you may have been invited to some of these. Obviously, your local association may be making arrangements to get together, but also certain regions have events, as do some of the national equality groups. such as Black members, women members, and so on. I know there are some events there where people have been invited to network as well. So you will be notified of those if they are relevant to you. In terms of who can participate, all of you here, I think, are representatives or observers, but you're certainly NHBT members, and you can take part in any of the conference sessions. It's worth just noting that the first session from 2 till 3 p.m. on the 29th of March is only open to NHBT members, so this Friday. That's because there'll be debate over issues that are not debated in public. And the financial statements are always debated in private session, not because they're not public documents, they are, and can be scrutinised by members of the public or by various interested parties. But the kind of debate which happens about how we spend our money and why we spend our money how we do in terms of supporting members can be sensitive. So that will be held in private session. We encourage people to take part in the debate in the conference hall, in the expected way, through making speeches, but also on social media, however not in the private session. So we ask that there's no Twitter or social media used to talk about what's happening in the, for example, the financial statements, and also no photographs at that point. When you're in public session, you can take photographs of speakers and tweet whatever you want within reason about the conference. The public sessions which take place throughout all the rest of conference are attended by members, the press, and members of the public actually can come in as well and get a pass to view some of the debate. It is worth bearing in mind the press are in the room as well, reporting on our conference as it happens.
Yeah, so just before we move on, particularly on that point, if any of you are planning to speak, please remember to keep your remarks limited to stuff that you'll be comfortable with your employer or others seeing in the media, because the national press will be in the room. You won't see them, they'll be up in a gallery above your heads. But anything that you might say can be reported on, so do bear that in mind when crafting your speeches.
Thanks, Chris. I've just tried to review a couple of the questions. So the conference does start at 2 p.m. So if you're not a member of the NHBT and can only attend the first public session, then there's no point being there before 2 p.m. If you are a member and can, do attend the private session at 2 p.m. So it's a financial statements which is important about how the NHBT uses members' resources and funds to deliver the services and what we deliver for members. So it is important in that sense. So do try and arrive before 2 if you're eligible to attend. Just as Chris was saying about where the press sit, this is a map of the auditorium. It's a bit meaningless until you potentially see the hall, but it is just worth pointing out, and it will be clearly labelled when you go into the auditorium, that if you are a voting member, elected representative, you do need to sit in the green blocks on this map. So B, C, E, F, and G. If you sit in another block and try to vote, your vote won't be counted as such or recognised. So the block D is a non-voting block, and then the blue blocks there will be where the press and others will sit in the auditorium. There are as well allocated spaces for wheelchair users, and it says here row N and O. That's a bit meaningless if you can't see it. When you get to the conference centre, if you do have access needs, make the registration aware, and they will direct you and show you where the appropriate places are.
Just say that they're the back 2 rows, I believe, of block C. So easily, if you see where my cursor is at the moment, that's where everybody will enter the auditorium through between F and E. Members who needing particular chairs or with wheelchairs should make their way to the back 2 rows of block C.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, so how do you take part as an elected rep? So we'll go into a bit of the detail now for a few minutes about how you take part in the democratic debate. So you can move a motion or second a motion. Unless you already know that's happening, then that won't be you, because people are in the agenda as named individuals who will move and second motions. So it could have happened if your local association proposed a motion that got balloted. It could potentially be someone from your association or yourself, but you already know about that. For most of you, you will have the ability to speak for against, or to a motion, and I'll come back to what that means shortly. All of you be able to vote on motions, any amendments to motions, and any reports. That will be the financial statements that I just referenced, and also the annual report. You'll be able to vote for or against. And also follow the conversation on social media. So the national NHBT account will be tweeting on through X, and also there'll be posts on Facebook throughout the weekend. But a whole range of people at the conference will be having discussions around their views and reporting back on what's happening at conference. It's just worth bearing in mind that if you do have something to say, saying on social media in itself doesn't influence the debate in the hall. The debate happens in real time in the hall, but you may want to pass comment or feedback to others about what's being passed through conference. And again, the press will will tweet as well about the conference and certain key stories.
Yeah, and just to add to that, all of this, our annual conference is the union's highest profile event of the year. And as well as the democratic function it has, it also serves to showcase the union to our members and to potential members. So, clearly as head of comms, I'm eager to get a positive message out there. So particularly encourage you, do use social media. If you like what you're hearing from the platform, you think a speech has been really good, be it from the General Secretary or for any elected rep in the room, and you like what you're hearing, tell the world. Let your followers on social media, let other teachers out there know what the union's doing, because it is a real opportunity for us. So do make the most of it.
Thanks, Chris. This is the one bit where I think it can just be a bit hard to get your head around the Older Earth conference and how the debate happens. So there's an agenda. You've obviously got the conference agenda, and it gives you a snapshot of what happens on each day. So it's I need to make this a bit bigger for my own eyes. So on Friday, I said the first private session. Essentially, there are the appointment of the scrutineers and auditors, which are some technical things we have to do legally as a union. But essentially, it's the financial statements that get debated during that private session. When we move into the public session, it's the opening ceremony, first of all, where there'll be the inauguration of the new president, who will make an address to conference. And then directly following that, when we go into the debate, every session has what's called a set motion. And the set motions are the motions that receive the most votes by members of the NHBT when setting the agenda for conference. So those 6 motions that were the most popular with members, and they have been given specific time on the agenda. So in the second public session, when the debate starts, about 3, I don't know, opening session about 3 o'clock, probably about 3:45-ish, don't quote me on that. But when the debate starts, the first set motion is entitled Putting Teachers First. So that motion will be debated. Motions can be debated for up to an hour. Some are debated for a considerable period of time, some are debated for far less time, but the longest any motion can be debated for is an hour. At that point, it has to move to the vote regardless. Once that motion has been carried or lost, depending on how conference votes, they will then debate the annual report. So the annual report debate takes place, which is the record of the work that's taken place in the last year on behalf of members. And then when the annual report is finished, it moves to what's called the balloted motions. And this is just the bit you'll have to follow when you're at conference. So in the conference guide, there is a list of, after all of the set sessions, the back part of the conference guide, conference agenda, the conference agenda has a list of all those balloted motions. The first one is mental health and inspections. That could be debated for 20 minutes and then carried. And then they would move on to reclaiming teacher autonomy, the next balloted motion. And they just work through the balloted motions. The reason you just need to get your head around that is on Saturday morning, it will move to the next set motion. So in the conference agenda, there's very clearly a named motion that will be debated first. There's then a 2C motion from Northern Ireland and Scotland, their respective motions, because each of the devolved nations gets to put a motion on the agenda. They will be debated. and then it will go back to the balloted motions. So in order to know where you are, you just have to follow through those 14 motions in the agenda. It's important if you want to speak on one. So if you want to speak on one of the later balloted motions, you'll need to keep your eye on when that's due to come up. If you want to speak on a set motion, then the agenda tells you very clearly the point when that will be debated. Hopefully that's clearish to people. When you sat in conference for an hour or two, it will be absolutely crystal clear. But I know before you get there, it can be a bit confusing about how the agenda works. So you've got 6 set motions. The motions that are listed will definitely happen in those periods in order. The balloted motions they'll run through in the rest of each session. Okay. Chris, do you want to move on to the just Sunday? So Sunday morning is the 6th public session. They'll do a set motion, then return to the balloted motions. And I say the times for all of this are in the conference agenda. I would recommend, of all the documents you've got access to, do just spend 10 minutes going through the conference agenda and timings, and you'll get familiar with how that works. Conference will end at 1:30 at the latest on Sunday, and the last session, that public session from 1 to 1:30, is the president's business. So essentially, it's the vote of thanks for the conference and just recognising people who have left the executive and so on. That happens at the end of conference. Okay. So if you want to speak at conference, how do you do that? The first thing is decide if you're speaking for the motion in support of it, or if you're speaking against the motion because you agree with it or a part of it or have concern about it, or you can speak to a motion. And if you speak to a motion, you're not speaking specifically in support or against it. You perhaps want to make a point of clarification or say something neutral about the motion. How do you do this? You used to request a speaker's card. They're still called cards, but they're not a card now. If you go onto the app, there's a clear button where you press a request to speak. You fill in your details, the form, so your name, local association. You talk about as well if you're a first-time speaker at a conference, you can check a box to say that. The reason for all of you, I imagine you would be a first-time speaker. The reason is the president will often call first-time speakers because it gives people a chance to take part in the debate who haven't before. You need to prepare the speech or some notes, depending how some people speak very naturally without notes. Some people will want a scripted written speech, whatever works for you, but do prepare to speak. If you're with people from your local association who've been before, I'm sure they'll be able to help you if you want to talk to anyone about preparing what you want to say. Make sure you're in the hall at the point it's being debated, because if the president calls your name and you're not in the hall, then you won't get the opportunity to speak. They'll just move on to the next person. Often at the start of a motion, they will call potential speakers to the front of the auditorium where there'll be a row of chairs for people who want to speak in the debate. The reason they do that is it moves things more quickly. If you happen to sit at the back of the last voting block, it can take you a couple of minutes to walk down towards the front to the podium to speak. So it just means people are nearer the front and keeps conference moving more smoothly. So the president would say, we're now going to debate set motion number 1, putting teachers first. Would speakers who intend to speak move to the front of the auditorium, and you'll move down to the front for that. So it's just really important if you're going to speak on a balloted motion that you know roughly when that's going to be. You can always ask staff on the registration if they know which point we're up to, if you're not completely familiar, and we'll be able to tell you where we are and anticipate when it might be. It's important to say the president decides who to call to speak. Not everyone has an automatic right to speak. The president will call a number of speakers, often trying to reflect debate. So if there's lots of speakers, there's 20 speakers for a motion and a couple of speakers against a motion, it is possible the president is more likely to call those against to manage the debate and some balance. That's completely will be up to the president, but that's often the case. They'll try and ensure some balance. Okay. If you when a motion gets to the end of the period of debate, you hold up your hand to vote. You do need to be in the voting blocks, as I said, but it's a simple for or against. There aren't any abstentions. They're just not catered for in our standing orders. So you vote for or against. You don't need to vote, but it won't be recorded as an abstention. Card votes. What's a card vote? So if a card vote is called, what it means under the standing orders is that the number of members you represent is what is counted for or against a motion. So I think the standing order says that if, I can't remember any people, Chris, I haven't got it in front of me, have to stand and call for a card vote. 20% of delegates, is it? 20% of people stand and call for a card vote. The president can call one. Very rarely happens. I can't remember a card vote in the last 5 or 6 years. So
I think it's very unlikely. It tends only to happen on rule changes. It's very, very unusual for a policy debate.
yeah, so it's unlikely to happen. But if it does, your delegation leader, who's someone you should know, it might be you actually, if you're the only person from association, but your delegation leader gets to cast the card vote. And what it means is if you are in Birmingham Local Association, rather than your vote counting for the 15 people in the auditorium at the time of the vote, Birmingham would cast their 7,000 member votes for or against the motion. If you're in, I only know the size of Birmingham, which is why I use the example. If you're in Leeds Association, you cast your 4,000 votes for or against. The larger ones are stuck in my head, but it means that the vote of the membership is what counts. So it can lead to a different result to a show of hands vote.
Just to add to that, you can split how your vote is cast. So if your delegation is split and has different views on it, and Birmingham, the delegation has a variety of views, then actually you can cast 4,000 votes one way and 3,000 votes the other way if that reflects the balance of opinion within the delegation. So that's why it's important that you need to relay to your delegation leader what your view is on the matter, because actually that vote doesn't have to be deployed in a uniform way.
Thanks for that, Chris. So I say it's worth knowing, but card votes don't often happen and are unlikely to happen, but it is worth understanding. And the president will take you through it as well. So if a card vote's called, the president will say, "This is what we're going to do next." So, okay, I think the last slide.
Have a team of scrutineers who will assist in conducting that. So we've a chief scrutineer who's a member of the Standing Orders Committee, and I think 15 other volunteers. You will all have received an email from us asking for people to volunteer as scrutineers. They will assist us with counting that card vote because, as you can imagine, it is a relatively complex process.
Just gonna move to the last slide before we move to questions. And I've seen one question that's come in about sitting as a scrutineer. But just before we get to that, just about if you're going to speak, the key thing to know is how long you can speak for. If any of you are moving a motion, and by all means indicate that if you are, or seconding one, and you'll have been told that, then it's 8 minutes to move a motion and 5 minutes to second a motion. Just for your information, if you wonder why the people who are speaking on the annual report and the financial accounts seem to be going on longer than that, there are actually different lengths of time for those. So the person moving the annual report can speak for 20 minutes. They're not just going on longer and no one's noticed. But for most motions, I say it's 8 minutes for a mover, 5 minutes for a seconder. Every other speech is 4 minutes pretty much. So if you're speaking for the debate, against it, or to a motion, then you get 4 minutes. There's nothing wrong with being less than 4 minutes. If you do reach 4 minutes, then you will hear a bell, which is telling you it's time to stop. And the president will probably ask you to wind up or stop you. When you're speaking on the podium, there are some lights that you can see that are in front of you that are flat. So if you're using, like, putting a tablet down on some paper that you've used as a note, you'll notice the lights. At the point when you start speaking, you will probably see a green light, which means start. You'll see an amber light after 3 minutes. And it depends, they'll normally flash it, so it depends who's actually doing the timekeeping, but you should see an amber light flash for a moment or a couple of times, and that's just giving you a prompt that you've got a minute left. If you see a red light, certainly if I'm timekeeping, I tend to flash the red light for a few seconds so you know it's time to stop before I hit the bell. But timekeepers may hit the red light at the same time they hit the bell, but that's just time to say it's time to stop, and you have to round up your remarks very rapidly at that point. It doesn't mean kind of round up for a few minutes, it means kind of literally stop at your final point. So that's how you speak. And I say nothing wrong with being less than 4 minutes, sorry. We'll move to questions now. There's some of the social media handles are there on the slide to follow through. I've just kind of refused to call it X, but Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and so on. If you have any questions, I know Chris has been answering some as we've gone through, but happy to pick them up, whether you want to show hands or put them in chat. Anything else? Or the alternative is, myself and Chris are at conference and we'll be around throughout, but you will be around the registration area as well on the day between 12 and 2. So by all means, grab us for another member of staff if anything occurs to you after.
Yeah, and I've posted the ANConf email address in the chat. So you can also direct any questions there. You'll have that elsewhere in your emails from the joining instructions. And any questions either be picked up by our colleagues in conference and events, or if it's more procedural, might be forwarded on to Phil or myself.
Just looking through the questions, I can see Chris has pretty much answered everything as we went through. Yeah, we'll get the PowerPoint slides out to everyone who's attended after this. And I can see the one about seating's been done as well. Yeah, so I think that's, yeah, we've covered what we wanted to do about the mechanics of conference. It's quite dry because conference is a democratic body, and I know that having timed speeches and voting and so on can feel like that. What I'd say to you is when you get there on Friday and the debate starts, it's actually, obviously the debate itself is not dry about the issues that are affecting you and all of our members across the whole of the UK, and actually beyond the UK if we've got delegates there from Gibraltar and some of the other territories where we represent teachers. So do enjoy conference. Please take part as fully as you can. I do urge you to speak if you do feel able to. Everyone I know who's spoken at conference gets a huge buzz and experience out of doing it. And also use the time to network with people from your local association and from your region. And by all means, do come and meet staff as well whilst at conference. I think that's everything then. So we'll pause there then, and look forward to meeting some of you next weekend. Well, this weekend in Harrogate. If anything occurs to you afterwards, as Chris said, do email annual conference the email address, and we'll get these slides out as soon as we can. Thanks, everyone.